I'm joined today by Desi Doyen, managing editor of Brad Blog's Green News Report. Desi, we've been talking so much about Keystone XL. We've talked about the just absolutely false initial estimates of the number of jobs that the Keystone XL pipeline would create or support, or whatever language is the language of the day. And we've also talked about the pollutive effect that supporting the fossil fuel industry has more broadly. But something that you've reported on the Green News Report is actually that there are some systemic flaws with U.S. pipeline safety, and that rupturing of a potential Keystone XL pipeline is something that is not getting the attention it deserves.
Oh, hell no, it certainly isn't. The National Transportation and Safety Board, the NTSB, they put out a report right before this latest Keystone XL pipeline vote. They put out a report that did, as you say, note, quote, systemic flaws in the way that both the states and the federal government regulate pipelines and enforce and inspect pipelines. But they also found that gas companies are also dropping the ball when it comes to making sure that their pipelines are safe. They're dropping the ball on inspections. They're dropping the ball on safety. They don't go in and actually test like they're supposed to. And there are often years between when a violation or a safety citation or a problem, a mechanical problem with the pipeline is noted, and there's often years before those companies will repair those pipelines, if at all. There were 5 different pipeline problems, major pipeline issues in January. There was one at the Yellowstone River, which we know is really difficult to clean up because it's all ice over, so they can't get to the oil to clean it up.
And
there was also
before we go on to other examples, when we talk about those types of pipelines that cross multiple states, is part of the issue that the regulations for inspection vary from state to state, or what is causing this lack of proper oversight?
Well, that's one of the issues that the NTSB identified, that because the federal government, because Congress has tried to give the states a lot of authority and leeway in regulating these pipelines, there is a huge difference, as you noted, from state to state. North Dakota, for example, has very lax regulations, and they also happen to not actually have really any inspectors on staff at the state level to conduct these tests and these operations and this oversight that's necessary to make sure that these companies stay in line.
And the anti-regulation, so-called free market right of the United States insists that when it comes to corporate regulations, that corporations have this implied and inherent incentive to make sure that everything is working fine, that they are compliant and up to speed, because it would be bad PR for them if there were problems. It would be a profit problem for them if they were to have a pipeline rupture, for example. It doesn't actually seem to be happening that way, though, does it?
No, as we've discovered in many different industries across many different sectors, voluntary guidelines don't work. Companies don't have a financial incentive to actually make sure that their products work. In fact, it is cheaper for them to wait and pay the fine and pay the cleanup and leave a lot of the costs of the cleanup to the taxpayer than it is for them to go ahead and just do the thing that they should be doing. So voluntary guidelines don't work at all. We have discovered that. And the free market idea that somehow this bad reputation is going to prevent them from trying to make, make them want to do a better job of maintaining their pipelines, we know this doesn't work. I mean, there were 24 pipeline accidents alone in 2014. There were 36 pipeline accidents in 2013. I mean, these are major pipeline accidents, not just, little leaks here and there. These are things that cause actual problems for actual people who have the misfortune of living next to these very under-regulated pipelines that have very little oversight.
So I do want to get to the kind of political future of Keystone XL, but before we do that, to touch briefly on jobs in a very particular way, usually the conversation around jobs and Keystone XL is, this is the number of jobs one group says will be created, this is the number of jobs another group says will be created, and generally we're learning that that number is very, very small. But there's another jobs element in general to pipelines that I don't think gets enough discussion, which is a pipeline, broadly speaking, long-term, eliminates jobs because it makes truck and train transportation unnecessary. Do you agree with that? And do you think it's being discussed enough?
Well, it's definitely not being discussed. I don't think anyone has actually broken out the data on how many specific jobs would be lost or gained via train travel or truck travel for distribution of the tar sands pipeline in Alberta. But they have tried to include what they would call ancillary jobs, extra jobs that come from the construction of the pipeline. Oh, in this town, there's going to be all these new people coming in, so we're going to need some restaurants, we're going to need some motel rooms, we're going to need some more apartments for them to rent for the duration of the construction of the pipeline. And that's how the jobs were calculated. So when you see someone saying, oh, it's going to create 1,000 million jobs, it's because they're essentially taking this report that the State Department borrowed from TransCanada and said, oh, well, they say it's going to be this many man hours. And it ends up not really being that, as you know. When you look at the final analysis, once the pipeline is constructed and completed, it will be no more than 50 jobs. They could get just as many jobs by building them all.
Okay, let's talk about the political prospects now of Keystone XL. The big news shortly after Republicans took over control of the Senate was that President Obama seemingly made it clear that if this bill were to get to him, that he would veto it. But what are the prospects now for passing Keystone XL, circumventing President Obama altogether?
Well, I think you bring up a good point. This is circumventing. It is bypassing the regulatory process. And that was the one Republican who voted against this particular bill to force the approval of the pipeline, Justin Amash. He said that he did not like the idea that this was going to be special legislation for one company to bypass the process. So President Obama has promised to veto this. I can't imagine that he would not follow through on a promise that he's made repeatedly. So what happens next after that is that the State Department is going to continue to finish its process of making a report to the president about whether this pipeline is in the national interest. The Republicans that have the majority of Congress right now have already voted 11 times to force approval of this pipeline. They're doing it for political reasons so they can bash Democrats with it later. They'll probably continue to do that up and until the moment when the State Department makes its recommendation to President Obama and he makes his decision. So, there could be, at that point, a bargaining chip for President Obama to use. As he said in his State of the Union address, why should we focus on just one pipeline when we can create all these other jobs? So he may, depending on how you listen to that, he may have been offering them hey, if we can get this other infrastructure stuff done, this gigantic infrastructure bill, then maybe that might be a bargaining chip that he would allow for that. So going forward, it really is a question of what happens when the State Department makes its recommendation, which it has not, and we don't know if it's going to decide now if it's in the national interest, based on the new EPA assessment that was publicly released. And then after that, President Obama will make his choice, and we may have a bargaining chip there.
So to explore that possibility a little bit, given everything that you and I know about the meaning and what the implications of the Keystone XL pipeline would be, is there a trade in your mind that would be a logical one where you would say, I'm okay with President Obama going forward on Keystone XL because we're getting A, B, and C, and that's just such a great thing?
Not for me personally. For me personally, no, there would not be, because when you look at the EPA's most recent assessment that they released publicly, they made it very clear that, with oil prices being as low as they are, this pipeline is really necessary for Canada to really exploit those tar sands to the very last drop and make all that money that they are dying to make. So to me, it's not a good trade-off with infrastructure. To me, with climate change looming and actually already hitting us right now, I think that it's really important for folks to understand that when you are in a hole, the first rule of holes is to stop digging, and Keystone XL is digging a bigger hole.
We're, of course, going to continue following it. We've been speaking with Desi Doyen, managing editor of Brad Blog's Green News Report. Thanks so much for joining us.